What's up, everybody? Welcome to Tesla Fix. Today we have an interesting episode because FSD is a big topic. And I don't know, we kind of get distracted by all the noise and Elon Musk and the elections and everything. I think we should go back to the nitty-gritty stuff of Tesla, the main topics, and look at the valuation of FSD and why it is so impactful. I mean, in Europe, this isn't available right now. The beta is available in the US, but we've also heard some news that maybe someday the beta will come to us as well, because the government body actually from Europe that discusses these kinds of topics actually went further with this. It's on the horizon at least. And that's why today I have a very special guest here to discuss these topics. And yeah, let's see who it is. So,
Hi,
Cern. Hi. Thank you very much for being back on here on the podcast to talk about FSD, because we've talked about the Tesla bot, and this already was such a big valuation, such an interesting kind of nutty, actually crazy kind of valuation. Also pretty good. Please watch the episode also if you haven't watched it. But Cern, maybe you would just want to tell the audience what we're looking into today.
Yeah, it's great to be back again with you. And as nutty as the humanoid bot opportunity is, the robotaxi opportunity is almost as nutty. So it's also a very interesting one to wrap our arms around.
That's a good thing here, because of course FSD is such a revolutionary thing for transportation, actually, because then it's just about driven miles. It's not about owning a car. It's not about these kinds of expenses you have to maintain a car, but then the possibility of actually renting out your car, your vehicle. Yeah, it's almost like Tesla will become a Uber right away when they enable this kind of software. And yeah, I'm super stoked about what you will show us today, what we can learn from you. So yeah, let's just dive right in.
It's interesting because we already have air travel as a service, and we have train travel as a service. Not too many people I know own their own trains.
Yeah.
There are a few people that own their own airplanes, but not many. And we're about to have auto transportation as a service at some point as well. And this is what's coming.
So, Cern, maybe you can dive into what we have, because you brought again slides, of course, but super great slides, I have to say, because I'm just a graphic designer. I can just see colors, but when it's too complicated with numbers, my brain explodes. That's why it's great what you prepared for me. So here it is. Maybe we just dive into this.
This is a complex topic, but I promise no spreadsheets today. And I'm sorry for those that love spreadsheets. You won't see a spreadsheet today, but you will see plenty of numbers. So yeah, what I'd like to talk about today with you is robotaxi, and sort of my view on how robotaxi might look in terms of how it could be structured, and what the economics of a robotaxi network might look like. I foresee three possible models for robotaxi. And these are not mutually exclusive. Actually, we'll likely see a combination of all three of these. But the one model is a fleet operator model, where large companies, so in the United States, we might think of Uber or Hertz. In Europe, Mr. Green comes to mind as a potential fleet operator. These are companies that would amass large quantities of vehicles and operate the network on behalf of Tesla. Tesla would provide the software and so on to run the models, but these companies would buy and own and operate the vehicles. It is possible those companies too could use vehicles owned by individual owners, and that's kind of the second model. Individual owners like you and I could, in theory, put our vehicles in the robotaxi network, either directly with Tesla or potentially via a fleet operator. And then the third model is Tesla doing it all by themselves. You know, some people have suggested that Tesla one day should stop selling vehicles and just create robotaxi vehicles and put them in its own network and operate that way. I happen to believe that we're likely to see a combination of all three of these.
Yeah, it's absolutely interesting, especially also, like you've said, the fleet operator model is on its own one of the nearest things you can think of, that of course renting company or leasing company that rents out vehicles or leases out vehicles, that they can just we have a fleet. We won't sell after the leasing terms the cars, because most of the time the leasing companies actually buy the cars back, and then after they bought them back they maybe use them for a second term sometimes, but mostly they sell that again and then buy new cars. And Hertz, sadly, of course, said, God, Tesla lowering prices, our value is crushed already. We're never going to work with them again and focus on internal combustion engines again. That's a bit sad, but yeah, it's a huge potential revenue stream, of course. And Mr. Green, like you've mentioned, I've visited them in Amsterdam, and of course, yeah, they rack up all the Teslas they can get. Everything with hardware 2.5 they're gonna keep, and that's pretty interesting. So they changed the hardware on some cars, even with Tesla still in the terms and stuff like this. But won't go into detail there. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just a quick comment on Hertz. If robotaxis become reality anytime soon, and who knows what the time frame is on this, but if it happened relatively soon, Hertz would be making a colossal mistake by selling so many Teslas, because those vehicles would be able to be put in a robotaxi network. Other EVs from other makers may not be ready for robotaxi. You need certain sensors and cameras and so on in the vehicles. Those vehicles don't have that. And so it's possible that Hertz could be selling their Teslas at the worst possible time. So stupid, it wouldn't surprise me if that turned out to be the case.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's dive into the fleet operator model. But before we do, let's go to the next page. I just want to give you a sense of when Tesla sells a vehicle, how much do they make? So this is a chart over the last few years on a quarterly basis, how much money Tesla has made on a per vehicle basis by selling vehicles to people. And you
on
can
average,
see,
right?
On average, and this is gross profit. So this is before some operating expenses and before taxes. But on a gross basis, it's between about 7,000, let's say about 15,000. Okay, it's fluctuated up and down. And lately it's on the lower end, but a couple of years ago it was on the higher end. So it's going to fluctuate. So when Tesla sells a vehicle, they make actually a pretty decent amount of money, between $7,000 and $15,000 per vehicle. Now, keep in mind that's a one-time sale, and they wouldn't get to make a sale to a customer again until they needed another car, and that might be 6, 8, 10 years down the road. Okay, so let's contrast that then with the robotaxi network. If you go to the next slide, this is kind of the punchline of this whole presentation, and I'm putting it right up front. When you sell an EV, as I said earlier, you could make between $7,000 and $15,000 in gross profit. Well, let's say on a net profit basis, that's more like $5,000 to $10,000. That's the two green bars in the lower left. That's a one-time sale. With a robotaxi network, Tesla could make, but depending on the model that we're looking at, let's say between $10,000 and $25,000 per vehicle per year for as long as the vehicle is in the network. So this chart actually isn't doing this justice. This chart actually should include the numbers over time. This is just showing 1 year. So the advantage of the robotaxi network from an economic standpoint is massive. And this is why people are so excited about the potential of this, because it turns a vehicle, which currently is a depreciating machine, into a money-making machine, right? It turns the car into a robot on wheels that basically has the ability to print money. So
absolutely,
we'll dive into all three of these models, but I just wanted to put it right up front and say, this is what we're looking at today, the potential for this new business. Now, one thing that sticks out is the Tesla only category. Those numbers might be a bit optimistic depending on what you include in there, but certainly if Tesla went alone, then they would get all the revenue and all the profit opportunity. I am hopeful that Tesla shares the wealth around a little bit and creates opportunities for fleet operators and opportunities for individual owners. Certainly when Elon presented the robotaxi idea many years ago now, he was presenting to individual owners. He was saying, buy a Model 3, you'll be able to put it in the network and have your vehicle earn money for you. So I hope that this model comes to fruition at some point.
Absolutely makes sense, because then they just take their cut, of course, and they are like Uber overnight. Like with an update, suddenly Tesla is Uber, and should also be valued like Uber as well, on top of their value right now.
Right.
So yeah, it's absolutely astonishing what potential there could be. Yeah.
When we look at this, and if you go to the next page, please, there's a lot of different assumptions that we need to make when we try to value this business. There's an amazing number actually of moving parts. So one of the key factors is how fast is the vehicle going to travel? So for this analysis, I'm assuming it's about 25 miles an hour on average. Depending on where you are, that could be more, could be less. In a dense city, it'll probably be a lot less. In a more rural environment, it'll be a lot higher. Average trip length matters as well. Shorter trips allow for different pricing than if it's a longer trip, and we'll get into that in a second. the number of empty miles. So a vehicle might pick me up, take me 5 miles, and then the question is, how far does that vehicle have to go before getting another ride to somebody else? So I'm assuming that 40% of the total miles traveled are empty. So it's coming back, it's traveling maybe not quite halfway back to find another ride. Again, it depends on where you are. If it's urban versus more rural, that those numbers could be very different. If it's making a run to an airport, then the empty miles might be 0. Once it gets to the airport, it's picking somebody else up immediately. These numbers matter, but on average, let's just go with 40% empty. You have to factor in loading and unloading time. And for the model, I'm assuming a couple of minutes. And then you have to factor in how much of this revenue will Tesla take. And for this analysis, I'm assuming 30%. It could be more, it could be less. I'm making an assumption about how long the vehicles will last, about 600,000 miles. I'm making an assumption about what the cost of FSD is if somebody doesn't purchase it, if you pay monthly. And I'm assuming that it'll go from a current $200 a month to about 500. Okay,
it would make sense because right now it's okay priced in that sense. I could even say maybe a little bit less depending on which version you have. But yeah, this makes sense that they, of course, when the value increases, makes sense that they charge more, of course, because you can also earn money now, and makes absolutely sense. Yeah.
What I would like Tesla to do personally, and this is me speaking personally, is if FSD makes the car the safest vehicle possible, then for individuals, they should price it as low as they can to get as many people using FSD to improve safety. But if you're going to use the car as a robotaxi and commercialize it, then FSD should be higher because now you're using that software that they've developed for commercial enterprise. And so that's why for the fleet operator, I've bumped it up to $500 a month from 200.
Yeah, it would make sense that they have a different software stack or a package on top of that. I can imagine that they use the software package that they maybe develop for the semi and also for the Cybertruck, maybe fleet operator software, and then for this add-on maybe they can charge the
There's definitely some fleet management features that would be helpful to fleet operators as well that could be built in. Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And then I'm looking at various vehicle utilization rates. So this is the percent of time that the vehicle is actually in operation in a robotaxi. This is different than the empty miles. The empty miles is it does a trip, and then how far does it have to go with nobody in the car? This is the percent of the day, so to speak, or any given hour that the car is being utilized. This is the key variable in the whole thing, is the utilization rate, and I'll show you very clearly in a minute. How why this matters so much. Okay, so these are the main assumptions. There's clearly lots of other assumptions that have to go into the cost of operating and maintaining and charging and cleaning, cost of new tires and insurance, and all those factors are built into the model. But frankly, those don't matter as much as these variables here.
Yeah, and also for the audience here, maybe you look at this, really try to think what's happening here, and then when we go on, then you can write your hate comments and say, this is so unrealistic and everything, or whatever, because it's interesting. You have to really consider the key assumptions and then see how the model is building up, like the last time as well. I think this helps very much that you also put them down, of course, because people need to know what you put into account here. Yeah, absolutely.
And just, again, if people think of those numbers as maybe an average with a range around them, and depending on where you live and the circumstances, the numbers could be very different in your community. I think, again, it's complex, and all the numbers kind of depend on each other. If you have longer trips, then the pricing will be different than if it's short trips. Right. If the cars
we have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I wanted to show you is just visually the utilization. So I'm running the models at 30% on the low end. So 7.2 hours a day, the vehicle is being used in the robotaxi network. The rest of the time, it is sitting somewhere doing nothing. All the way up to the top end, 65% of the day, 15.6 hours, the vehicle is being utilized in the robotaxi network. Now, again, back to the empty miles, 40% of the miles that it drives in that 15.6 hours are empty. So in addition to the time that it's not being used, there's still a good amount of empty miles being driven by the vehicles. Okay, so the vehicles aren't making money 65% of the day. They're just being deployed in the network 65% of the day. Okay, think about a taxi operator. They might be sitting at the airport waiting for a ride.
Yeah.
They're working, but they're not driving anybody, right? Same kind of concept here. So then the next chart shows the average number of trips and miles driven per day given different utilization rates. So again, start on the left at 30%. the vehicle would do about 20 trips a day if the average distance was 5 miles per trip, and 2 minutes for loading and unloading and all that. So factoring all that in, and the distance it has to travel to get to the next pickup point. So 20 trips a day, and it would travel about 164 miles. If the vehicle utilization was higher, all the way up to 65%, it could do 42, 43 trips a day and travel as far as 355 miles. So you can already see here the vast difference in terms of utilization and what it means in terms of how many trips and how far the car is traveling.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's more than twice as much trips at 65% than at 30. And so you could just safely say, well, that's more than twice the amount of revenue opportunity, right? You're picking up more than 2 times as many people and traveling double the distance. So I just want to give people a visualization of that. Again, utilization is the key variable in a robotaxi network. So it would be in Tesla's best interest, as well as the fleet operator, as well as any individual owner that's putting their car in the network, to have a network that's being utilized as much as possible.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So now let's look at sources of revenue. I assumed, again, we can look at Uber for kind of the model here, that or even a taxi service, when you get in the vehicle, there's a base fare. Just to step in the vehicle, there's a base fare. And that's the dark blue bars at the bottom. Okay. And these are numbers per vehicle per day. So if we look at the 30% column again on the left, you've got a certain amount of base fare. And then you've got the lighter blue, which is a fare based on the distance traveled. And again, people are familiar with this from the taxi and Uber model. And I also have an idle time fare that because you're taking time, if you want to take your sweet time and loading and unloading the vehicle, fine. But you're just going to pay for it as though you're using the vehicle. Also, and you'll see in a second, I did an example where if you take a nap in the vehicle, because there's no one there to kick you out. If you fall asleep in one of these vehicles, you're going to be asleep until you wake up, unless the robotaxi network has some kind of alarm system built into it.
Oh, they have the panic mode, so I've already experienced that. It's pretty.
But you can also say, well,
wakeful. Let's say that it's going to wake you up.
It could, although they could just say, you know what, if you want to take a nap in the vehicle, fine, you'll just pay for the nap time. That's another way to do it.
The idle time, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's the component of the fare. The vast majority of it would be based on distance, and that makes sense. The further you go, the more you should pay. But if you're doing lots of short trips, then that distance fare doesn't add up to much, and so you do need a base fare in order to make it economically viable. Now, if you go to the next page, I've compressed the numbers from the previous chart into just the bright blue on this chart. And what I want to show here is, in addition to trip revenue, the base plus the distance plus the idle component, there's other revenue opportunities as well with a robotaxi network. Okay, there's advertising.
True.
There's advertising in the car. There's advertising on the outside of the car. You could wrap the car in any advertisement you wanted to. So there's some revenue opportunities there. There's what I'm calling curated experiences. Let's say you're traveling to a new city, right? And you want a tour. Why couldn't the robotaxi give you a tour of the city, take you around to various restaurants, take you to the best spots, and just be your tour guide? It would be more than capable of doing that.
Yeah, and I have to say something here, because with my holy grail would be Grok integration when it's ready to do that. Yeah. And that's something that also could work, that you have a route that they're going to tell you what you see when you drive around, because it knows the location. Based on that, we're going to see interesting stuff there. It's good, interesting concept here.
And not only that, you tell the car and say, hey, I'm hungry. And the car comes back to you and says, hey, Jan, here's 5 restaurants nearby. Are you interested in any one of these? And you know what? The restaurants would pay Tesla money to bring customers to them.
True. Yeah, that's also,
right?
We know that in bigger tourist places, it's like this, that also drivers get a fee kind of when they get some customers to them. That's true.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, the other part in purple is entertainment and connectivity. Entertainment will be a big part, I think, in the in-car experience, whether it's watching videos, whether it's playing video games, who knows what. These cars actually would make great sort of video gaming pods. They wouldn't even have to move. You could just go and use one, and then they could make the screen inside, wrap around or whatever it is. It could be an interesting opportunity as a kind of a entertainment spot. And then finally, the hardware in the car, if it's sitting idle, can be used to process AI, distributed inference opportunity. So If you've got the AI model in the vehicle, it could be processing the AI query, and you could make money that way. So in that case, the car that's not moving as much, that's sitting there idle, actually has a bigger opportunity to make money than one that's being utilized a lot more. And so that yellow bar just gets a little thinner as it goes up. Now, in this model, I've assumed very, very, very tiny amounts for all those other categories. You can just see there's slivers, right? But potentially, in some markets particularly, some of these things could be very large. But I'm basically saying, we'll put them in here so you can see them, but we're just kind of ignoring the potential for what these things could be. Okay, so it's also not just making money on driving people around. There's all kinds of other opportunities.
Also, what's interesting is that, of course, those additional revenues that you could get could also be shifted to reducing the price or something like this for the, I don't know, for the owner itself or for the FSD, that it's being cheaper or something like this could also, like savings or in that sense, could also be a possible method. But of course, it makes sense to keep them as kind of revenue on top to calculate this whole model.
That's right.
Too. Yeah.
And the other thing too, I should mention that there could be a subscription offering, like kind of like Amazon Prime. You could be a Prime member. You could be a RoboTaxi network member.
That makes
pay
a lot of sense.
You pay a monthly subscription, and then you get a discount then on your fares or a discount on whatever else, the connectivity,
or on the services. Exactly.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of things like that they could do. Yeah.
Or a huge value proposition. If they don't charge anything for all of those things, then it's just a huge value proposition on top of. Then they could even, if they're competing with traditional taxi fleets or anything, then they can make these things free at first, and then afterwards in some years to come. But it's potential revenue. It makes sense to really see that. Interesting. Very interesting.
It becomes a platform with which to layer services on top of, and we've probably just scratched the surface on the potential there. Okay, so then the next page is the revenue split. And if you recall from earlier, our assumption was that Tesla would take 30% of the network revenue. Now, I don't know if they would share the advertising and the entertainment and connectivity and all those things, but that's to say they do. And actually, I'm sorry, in this case, we're not. I'm actually assumed that Tesla's keeping all those other revenues. In this case, I'm giving the RoboTaxi fleet operator 70% of the trips revenue, and Tesla's keeping the rest. But you can see that there's quite a bit of money in it for both parties from a revenue standpoint. At 30% utilization, the car is making about $60,000 a year. At 65% utilization, the vehicle is generating revenue of about $130,000 a year. That's revenue, and these parties then have their expenses. So let's take a look at then what it looks like for Tesla. So in addition to the RoboTaxi network revenue, the 30% of the total vehicle revenue that Tesla gets, they also get the FSD revenue that comes from the fleet operator. So the red bar is what the passengers pay Tesla. The yellow bar is what the RoboTaxi fleet operators pay Tesla. Now, there is a trade-off here. Tesla could raise or lower the FSD amount, and correspondingly, they could raise or lower their take. That 30% could be more or less. They could charge $10,000 a year for FSD, but then their take would probably be less, maybe than 30%. Or the 30% take rate may vary based on the performance metrics of the fleet operator in some other way, how many vehicles they have, or just other metrics that Tesla might apply to give the fleet operators incentive to do certain things. Again, this is a very complex business model because there's so many different moving parts to it. So please don't be too critical of my assumptions here. I understand that there's a lot of different possibilities. I'm just showing you one model here. Okay.
And I wanted to add for the audience here, maybe you can write down in the comments if you have really thoughts on how to add to the model, how to modify the model. Please do that. And Cern, of course, will read some of the comments when this is uploaded, of course, and we'll go through. And it makes sense to kind of share your ideas and figure out how we can come up with even more revenue streams, or if it's absolutely nonsense, then write it down as well. I mean, this is a hub for discussion. I wanted to emphasize this now.
And thank you, because this model actually reflects some of those very things, comments that people have made on other videos that I've done with other folks, and I've incorporated that into the model. The model just keeps getting better and better. So yes, thank you. That's fantastic. Okay, so now let's look at what it looks like for Tesla's profitability. Again, I promised I wouldn't show any spreadsheets, so you're missing kind of the middle part here. I've gone from revenue now all the way down to net profit, and I haven't shown you what's in the middle. but there's a whole bunch of expenses, and the net profit ranges from $10,000 per vehicle up to about $24,000, depending on utilization. And the profit margin ranges from about 41% up to the mid 50s. So this is a very attractive business model in terms of profitability, right? There's not too many businesses in the world that have this kind of opportunity, these kinds of profit margins, right? So this is how it looks for Tesla. And again, this is when they are working with fleet operators, and this is Tesla's share of that. Now let's take a look.
We're still talking about the 30% bar on the bottom, expanded now into the last two sheets we saw. But I wanted to ask you something here, because what are potential costs? Maybe you can brush through them a little bit inside of your spreadsheet. What came about here? What are the costs that Tesla has a little bit? Maybe you can just tell the audience and me what
I'll show you that in three more charts. So hold that question.
Perfect.
And we'll get to that.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So before we leave Tesla, let me show you what this could look like at scale. Right now I'm showing you on a per vehicle basis. This chart is very pretty, but I wanted to show you what it could look like if there's 10 million vehicles in the fleet. 20 million, 30 million, 40, 50, up to 100 million vehicles. You pick your number, how many vehicles you think could be in a robotaxi fleet. Let's start on the left. Let's say that there's 10 million vehicles. Well, now what I'm showing you with the color bars is at the different utilization rates from 30 up to 65. You pick your utilization. Do you think the cars will be used 1/3 of the time, 1/2 of the time, 2/3 of the time, or any other combination? Then you can see, based on my model, what the potential net income is in billions of dollars per year for a robotaxi network for Tesla. This is just Tesla's share. Just to make it easy, let's pick the one where there's 50 million vehicles. It's kind of in the middle of the chart, almost in the middle. At 30% utilization, Tesla is making $500 billion a year in revenue. Sorry, in profit. In profit. Net income. If the utilization rate can be improved, that 500 billion surpasses $1 trillion. As I said earlier, utilization is the key to making this model as beneficial as possible to Tesla and the fleet operator and the individual owner. Because I use the same numbers throughout my model, I don't think that if Tesla does get to 80, 90, 100 million, that the pricing would be the same. I think that the pricing would be lowered. So these numbers are a bit optimistic, perhaps, on the right side of this chart. Absolutely. But even then, we were conservative because we didn't include revenues from other services, or very, very much revenue from those things. So, I think we're in the ballpark here of what it could be like, the potential.
Do we know how many vehicles right now are utilized right now, or registered, or something like this? I mean, it's difficult to track this, because then, of course, a car crashes, or it's going to be replaced or anything. So it's hard to track these kind of numbers. Have you read something about how, on average, how much or anything? Because that would be, I
believe Tesla they produced their 5 millionth vehicle. Was it sometime last year?
Yeah.
I don't know how many vehicles have been, destroyed, crashed.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's say there's 4.5 million right now in operation, something like that. Okay, so if this year they sell, 2.2 million or 2.4 million, next year, it's going to add up pretty fast. Yeah, I'm not putting any time frame on this. I'm not saying it's going to be 50 million vehicles by 2030 or anything. It's just at some point, whenever that happens, you pick your date. Again, we don't know. We really don't know when they will solve full self-driving. I'm just saying that when they do, and when the network gets to a certain size, these are the potential net income numbers that we could be looking at. And if you go to the next page, here's what it could mean from a market cap perspective. Okay, so each color is a different utilization rate. Let's focus on the red one first. That's the lowest one. That's 30%. At 10 million vehicles in the fleet, the market value of a robotaxi network would be 3 trillion, using a PE of just 30. Okay. Now, if there's 10 million in the fleet and it's still growing, the PE would probably be a lot higher. I'm just, for simplicity's sake, keeping the PE the same. If there's 50 million vehicles in the fleet and they're being utilized at 30%, that's a $15 trillion market value for just the robotaxi business.
Oh God, that's so nutty.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's not as nutty as the bots, but it's pretty nutty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, It's already pretty. Also, the PE ratio right now on February is $40 and not $40, 43. Yeah, that's around that at the
Yeah.
12th of February yesterday. Yeah. Mhm.
And so if we start from the red line and then we say, okay, if they work to increase utilization, look what that does for the market cap, right? It more than doubles it if you get all the way up to 65%, right? So I don't know where it's going to be, but we've got numbers between 3 trillion and 73 trillion. It's in there somewhere at some point in time. These are all unknowns at this point, but we can see the progress that Tesla is making. We can see that self-driving vehicles will become a reality at some point. I'm confident of that. I just don't know when. And that will open up an opportunity for this new market to form. Now, ARK Invest in their recent book said that the market by 2030 will be a $28 trillion opportunity. You can see my $30 trillion line there, and you can kind of go across. By my model, that would mean, 40 million vehicles utilized at 65%, or 90 million vehicles utilized at 30 some percent, depending on utilization. So you can kind of pick that. But it's also true that by 2030, perhaps the PE on this business would be enormous. Would be much higher than 30. If the PE is 60, then you can double some of these numbers, even when the amount of vehicles is much lower. So it's very sensitive to those kinds of assumptions.
Could you also dive a little bit into the PE ratio for people who don't know what that is? Because for me, it was at first also a little bit get used to all the financial terms when I started with my small channel venture here. But maybe you can just tell the audience what that means.
So let's just start with one vehicle. Let's say one vehicle makes you $10,000 a year, and you go to sell your business that has one vehicle making $10,000 a year to somebody. Well, that person is going to pay you more than $10,000 because that vehicle could make you $10,000 this year, next year, the year after, and so on. So let's say the vehicle is good for 10 years. That person should be willing to pay you, something under $100,000. They need to build in a return for them, so that the PE would, in that case, would be less than 10. But with businesses, they can grow over time. It's not just one vehicle. It's $1 million, it's 10 million, it's 50 million. It's a growing business. So the market opportunity is expanding. So investors
or economies of scale when they kick in, for example, or
that's right.
Software services, SAS and stuff like this. Yeah.
And so you often see really high PEs for a rapidly growing business in a rapidly growing market, even if the business is not very profitable. Yes, right. So the profitability may come with scale, and the profitability will grow over time just because of the number of units that they can sell. They can sell more and more, and so the total profit. So you often see very high PEs early on in a company's life cycle, and as they mature, you get to a point where the PE ratios can be quite low if there's no more growth available in the marketplace. Right.
That's interesting because you kind of see the PE ratios of the German legacy auto companies, for example, is absolutely near zero, actually, like or 1, 2, or 10, maybe in that ballpark, or 20, maybe, but not like Tesla, like 70. But for example, software companies have a way higher PE ratio, like Nvidia, for example, also has north of 100 the PE ratio.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a combination of the profitability level. The higher the level of profitability, the higher the PE would be. It's a combination of the growth rate, and it's a combination of the market, and also a combination of the market opportunity. How big could the market be one day?
Yeah.
And we're talking here with robotaxi, the potential for a massive market. There are over 2 billion, well, depending on the numbers you use, 1.5 to 2 billion vehicles in the world. So how many of those ultimately will be autonomous? I think it's probably pretty safe to say that at least 100 million of them will be, right? And perhaps more, ultimately.
Yeah, and what is interesting is you fixated the PE ratio that you can calculate it, because when you have all these variables, then the model kind of explodes because you cannot really track anything anymore because there are so many uncertainties. But when, of course, you couldn't imagine that the PE ratio will be way higher when you start to go up this ladder more and more. If more and more cars are produced, then the potential maybe also is increasing. That means that also when you have the 30% utilization, or the was it no it was the 30% red line here. When the PE ratio is raised, then this line also, of course, jumps up a little bit.
That's right. And you could imagine that with a higher utilization rate, the PE that would be applied to that would be higher too. The company is more profitable. So there's a lot of different moving parts on this chart. I'm just trying to simplify it as much as possible and show a static PE level.
Like a snapshot. It's very important. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So getting back to your question that I asked you to hold, let's look at the expenses. So now let's shift away from Tesla and look at the fleet operator. What expenses do they have when they put vehicles in the fleet? So starting from the left, they have FSD. They've got to pay Tesla the $500 a month, the $6,000 a year in my model for that. Then they have the cost of the vehicle, and I'm assuming a certain lifetime, so there's a certain annual cost of the vehicle over the life of the vehicle, depending on how far it's driven and so on. They've got a financing cost, and I'm assuming an 8.5% interest rate, so pretty high financing cost. They've got charging expenses, cleaning, parking, insurance. They might have some marketing expenses. Maybe Tesla takes care of that, but maybe the fleet operator does some of their own marketing, potentially. And I've got two other buckets, other operating costs, 1 and 2, just for other things. And that's about $1,600 a year. I've got tires and maintenance. The more these cars are utilized, they're going to burn through tires really fast. So that's a pretty big number for these vehicles. And this, by the way, what I'm showing you here is at the 30% utilization level. I'm just picking one of those levels and just looking at that. And then I'm assuming some EV taxes and some of the other expenses associated with that. And so that takes your, just under 45,000 of revenue. Take those expenses out, leaves you with a gross profit of about 17,000 per vehicle at the 30% utilization rate. If we go to the next page, and I'm sorry, I guess maybe this qualifies as a spreadsheet, but technically it's a graph. This shows you the same numbers, but at the different utilization rates with the gross profit line at the top. So what I showed you just on the previous page was the 17,000, right? 799. That becomes the leftmost column on this next page. And then working to the right at different utilization rates, those expenses. So you can see tires and maintenance, it goes up pretty considerably as the utilization increases, right? And that would be the case. You're driving more miles per day, you're going to burn through the tires much faster. The charging expense goes up, right? The cleaning expense goes up because I'm assuming that you clean the vehicle after a certain number of uses. So the more it's being used, the more it needs to be cleaned. The one thing that doesn't change is the FSD cost. That's a fixed cost of $6,000 a year per vehicle. Now, Tesla, I suppose, could price FSD based on usage, and maybe they will. I don't know. Hopefully, this answers your question in terms of what expenses are there. This is a pretty good list. Now, this isn't Tesla's expenses. This is the fleet operator's expenses. Tesla might have some other expenses in terms of maintaining the software and other things associated with them to maintain the network. But this is a pretty good list, I think, in terms of what the costs are to actually operate the vehicle in a fleet. And then this is what it looks like for the profitability of a fleet operator. Their margins aren't as high, but they make more money potentially per vehicle than Tesla does. And then the next page is a comparison of the Tesla and the fleet operator. So at 30% utilization, they make a similar amount of money. And as the vehicle is utilized more, the fleet operator actually makes more money than Tesla does under the model that I've constructed here.
But also the fleet operator has more expenses, right? Because he is operating the fleet and Tesla is out of the loop on that one. So the
fleet operator has more risk. Risk. They've got all this capital tied up in vehicles. They have more risk. So it makes sense to me that they should have more of the upside.
Absolutely.
Okay? And then the yellow bar at the top with the green circles, it just shows the ratio. So they make about the same amount at 30%. And then at 65%, they're making 40% more than Tesla is. So the ratio of the profit increases over time. Now, let's consider some different scenarios. So on the left bar here, I've got what we've just been looking at, the 5-mile trips. What happens, though, if the trips are half that distance? Let's say maybe in New York City or something, and the distance traveled is really short. Well, in that case, the base fare would be higher because it's more short trips. The distance fare would be lower, and the idle time would be higher because you get more people getting in and out of the cars all the time. It's just the burning time. But short trips are good in that sense. If they're priced appropriately, you can make more money, utilizing the car more. Actually, I'm sorry, this is at 35% utilization. I'm fixing the utilization here, so it's the same utilization. It's just the shorter the distance, the better. And you can see if the trips are longer, the third bar, 20 miles, then the revenue comes down a bit. So this is how sensitive the model is to distance. There's some sensitivity there, but not a crazy amount. If the car travels faster, 20% faster, then that helps, right? Because now you can have more trips, right? So the ideal thing for a robotaxi is to get everyone else off the road. So these cars can go as fast as possible and not have to worry about running into human drivers. Now, that's not happening anytime soon. But eventually, if we get to a world where almost all the vehicles are autonomous, then the travel speed would be significant. They wouldn't have to stop at stop signs or traffic signals. They would just feather their way through because the cars would be able to communicate with each other, right, without stopping and be able to thread their way through intersections. So in the long term, there's a tremendous opportunity to increase revenue and profitability from not having to stop. What happens if the empty
Makes
miles
sense.
instead of 40% are 25%? Well, that helps too. The car is not going as far to pick up the next ride. The less empty miles, the better. If the empty miles are 50%, you can see that drops down. So that's a fairly significant one in terms of its impact to revenue. And then the last two, if somebody gets in the car, falls asleep, and we don't charge them idle time. So now suddenly you've got a money-making machine that's been sidelined. I'm suggesting that Tesla, not really care about that, but just charge people. If you're in the car, it's going to cost you. If you want to sleep, fine. In that case, the idle time fare would be a bigger component that people are taking naps.
Yeah, or also the assistant could be very. If that is not an option, then the assistant could be, or maybe Grok or anything. I don't know, the assistant that is inside of the Tesla. Like, I'm just freeballing here, total nonsense I talk now. But then it could be saying like, okay, you got to get out of the car. But if you don't, then we have to charge you $5.
Right.
And then the credit card gets more and more.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is we don't want people driving home drunk. So to encourage them to be safe, get in the car. You know what? If you need to take a nap, and you wake up, you'll be in a safe place. There's all kinds of ways of doing that. Or the car could get aggressive and try different methods of waking you up. It could take you on a wild ride and scare you awake, I guess, is what it could do. But yeah,
I don't know if that's safe for the roads, but maybe it's gonna get you to a racetrack.
Right, that's right.
Model S Plaid, yeah.
Yeah. So let's take a look at the effect on profitability of these different scenarios on the next page. You can see, some of them have a pretty significant impact on the profit margin. This is from the fleet operator's perspective. You can see that the margins, are impacted pretty significantly by longer trips, more empty miles, or if they weren't getting paid for nap time. If they are getting paid for nap time, then fine. The margins are good. You can see the biggest one on here is short trips. The profitability per car is at $20,000 versus long trips. It's only $7,000. So what this shows me is that my model probably is not calibrated properly, because they should charge a higher fare perhaps for the distance, and maybe a lower base fare or something, so that these numbers aren't so different. It again depends on the market you're in. If you're in New York City, then most of the trips will be short. But every now and then there could be a long one, and so you have to make sure the pricing is right for that.
Yeah, the trips are short, but maybe the drive is longer hours sitting in the car and stuff like this. Those are so many variables. It's super difficult.
There's a lot.
If you don't time freeze some of the variables, you cannot model this. Yeah, it's.
And this is where AI will probably come in handy to help Tesla figure out how to price this stuff in real time.
Yeah, that's true. And you can just play around with the model and find the absolute sweet spot.
The next page is the same chart, but for Tesla. And you can see that it impacts them too, but not quite as severely as the fleet operator. Okay, so again,
comparison here again. Yeah,
yep.
Just wanted to show that. Yeah, and now we have Tesla. Yeah,
these things matter for both parties, and they would be both incentivized to figure out the best way to optimize this. And I'm probably scratching the surface at the number at the different types of things to look at here. But these are some things I thought of.
Yeah, and also, again, to the audience, if you have something to add here, this would be also very valuable, I think, to look at it, because we have so many fluctuations, you could say, like in this model, depending on the scenarios. And maybe you have also another scenario to add here, yeah.
The next one just puts the two side by side again. Compares the gross profit per vehicle with the different scenarios. So, and the ratio of the two in that yellow bar. So I would imagine that kind of no matter what, that Tesla would want to make sure that, there isn't as much of a swing depending on the scenario. Now, if you average things out, maybe there's one day where the vehicle isn't making much money because of whatever the nature of the trip, or somebody took a nap in the car for 5 hours. Over the course of a year, things would average out pretty well. Okay, let's take a look now for individual owners. So let's move on from the fleet operator and look at you and I. We have a vehicle. We want to make a little bit of extra money. Tesla has said that we would be able to include our vehicle in the fleet. So how might that look? Now, just for simplicity's sake and for comparison purposes, I'm using the same assumptions that we talked about for the fleet operator model. Tesla takes 30% of the network revenue, and you and I get the rest. And you can see at 30% utilization, that's $37,000 a year on our vehicle. And if the vehicle is used 65% utilization, that's up to $80,000. So again, the potential for our vehicles to be money-making machines is kind of interesting.
Yeah, then your car pays itself off pretty fast, I would say, if it has 65% utilization. And for me, for example, I drive to work and my car just sits there for 8 hours or something like this, or let's say 7. I mean, in the utilization, I think this would be also 35% of 30%, right? Utilization from the whole day. And also, of course, when I go to sleep, of course, then my car could drive again. That's something I didn't calculate.
Oh, you're probably utilizing your car 10% of the day, if that. So the individual, though, has expenses too. These aren't profit or anything. So if you go to the next page, taking the same format just for consistency as the fleet operator, but you're not going to have marketing expense. You're not going to have to pay for parking unless you already do. But I'm just assuming most people don't have to pay for parking. They might have a garage or a driveway they can park in. They probably clean it themselves, or maybe they would pay a cleaning service or something. But there's some expenses that they perhaps wouldn't have that the fleet operator would have, depending on the circumstances. And I'm using a lower FSD cost in this case. That's the one big difference. Instead of the $500 a month, it's $200 still. Tesla could easily increase that. There's plenty of money here for Tesla to increase it if they wanted to. But I'm saying a gross profit for an individual of between $20,000 at 30% utilization up to about $50-some thousand at 65% utilization. So pretty attractive. And then for Tesla, they get their share of the robotaxi network in red, and then they get the FSD cost that you pay them. So this is what their revenue looks like. And then running it through the income statement for the next chart shows you the net income and the profit margins for Tesla. So again, about $10,000 at the low end to about $25,000. This is very similar to the fleet operator model in terms of the profitability to Tesla. Between $10 and $24,000, $25,000. And very attractive.
Because of course they still have 30% of the revenues, and you still have the liability on the side of the operator, in that case the private person that just utilizes their own car and not running a fleet, more or less. But
now let's look at the third model. Tesla goes alone. They keep all the revenue for themselves. There's no one else involved. They're doing everything. So that's a possibility, and I think they've said as much. In a new market, perhaps, where there's maybe not enough Tesla owners or enough people willing to supply their vehicles, or the fleet operators aren't yet up and running, Tesla could easily supply that market with a number of vehicles to get it going. And then perhaps as more individuals come in and use and deploy their vehicles in that market, or as fleet operators establish themselves, then Tesla could pull back and put those vehicles somewhere else to kind of seed those markets.
Yeah, also a possibility could be, I mean, it's similar with the supercharger network. They kind of open it up a little bit, but maybe they can, like, if you're a good fleet operator, then you can be Tesla certified or something like this. And I mean, you can run wild now with everything, and maybe they can just, you're gonna get dragged into the mothership if they see, oh, this is a profitable fleet operator, let's take him, for example. Like, that's a scenario that I also could imagine, like, a licensed or Tesla licensed from the quality standard side. Maybe they can do something like this and buy the fleet business or something like this. Yeah.
The other thing too is Tesla needs to make sure when they go into a new market that the customers aren't waiting too long. So there needs to be enough vehicles for it to be a pleasant experience for everybody, right? It's not much fun if you're waiting for an Uber for an hour. It doesn't really work. So same kind of thing here. So it will be very important for Tesla to supply some of their own vehicles in these markets, at least for a period of time. And what I want to show here is that because they're taking all the revenue themselves, the profitability is kind of ridiculous. But that also tells me that they don't have to optimize necessarily for maximum profitability, right? They might make their cars like kind of second tier and say, okay, we'll deploy our vehicle only if we need to. Otherwise, it's just going to sit here. Right, or something like that. Like Tesla doesn't have to compete.
That makes sense.
They don't have to compete with you and I or the fleet operator in these markets. They're there to kind of serve as kind of the backup if need be. Yeah, and they can still make a lot of money.
Yeah, they could just have a drone hub where they have their car drones and they just be spewed out, or maybe at the supercharger locations, there are 4 Teslas ready for the fleet if necessary. I mean, this is just a crazy scenario. Of course, these cars need to be maintained too, so it has to be something like a gas station or something like this. I'm just thinking around.
Yeah. So maybe on the low end of this chart, instead of 30%, I could have gone to 20 or even 10% to see what that looked like. And you can probably tell directionally what it might look like. It's it's still going to be a pretty significant amount of revenue even at that. But it's going to be interesting to watch this unfold. And then if we go to the next page, the profitability at the low end at 30%, it's 25,000, which, if you recall, was the high end in the other scenarios.
Yeah.
And then the high end here is $57,000 per vehicle per year. Is crazy. That seems highly unlikely to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good vehicle every year that they can pump out. Like every year the Tesla's utilized, they can clone it almost every year.
Well, yeah, and if these are next generation vehicles and they only cost $25,000 to make, then
then you have 2 of those at least.
Yeah. The message with this, though, is not necessarily these numbers and this upside. It's just that Tesla can strategically use their own vehicles and their own fleet to sort of supplement what individuals and what fleet operators can supply to the market. And then again, this is the summary page, but this time I looked at it over 5 years. So just go back to that first chart that we did, at the beginning. No, you don't have to go back there. But this if you sell EVs, Tesla makes between $5,000 and $10,000. The robotaxi world, in my opinion, in the worst case, they're making about $50,000 over a 5-year period. So it's 10 times as much on the low end, and on the high end, it's even more. So this is why people are so excited about the potential for robotaxis, because the economics are nutty.
Yeah, they really
potential.
are.
You're turning vehicle ownership into a service, and the ability then to operate at scale and leverage vast numbers of vehicles yields some pretty incredible opportunities. And so this is why ARC and others have been so excited about this potential. Now it's just a matter of when. And unfortunately, we've been waiting a long time. So all people are losing faith that this is coming. That we're getting closer and closer to this all the time.
Yeah, that's so crazy if you look at the numbers, because that's also so interesting, because Florian from Mr. Green also went there. They are small, or not a small, but in comparison to other fleet operators like Hertz or something, they are small leasing company in Europe but it's growing pretty fast, and they just keep their cars. And when you see a model like this, it makes sense. They are really speculating. All the value also is of course, in the leasing business, they have great services that they also use and help their customers. If customer service pretty good, that's also the value proposition. But the big one is, of course, they keep the cars. Again, they keep the cars. They're already doing that, and they are already modeling that into, or considering these kind of models, even on the low end, in their value proposition of their company, or their.
Yeah, I would say Florian is one of the first people to recognize this opportunity, and he's beautifully, and his team have beautifully positioned their company for this opportunity. The question is how long do they have to wait for this to become a real opportunity? But they certainly will be as ready as anybody could be ready when robotaxi becomes a thing.
Yeah, they're sadly on the wrong continent, if you would say that, because of course in the US the FSD will be deployed at first, because we have this beautiful red tape bureaucracy in Germany, and of course Tesla needs to gather more data. It's also very important because also I think we have to consider that FSD works super well in the West Coast, and that's something that's very important, because they are the most Teslas that are deployed. There's the most data they have available about the streets and everything. And when you move over more and more to the Midwest, and then you kind of tell, okay, it's FSD isn't as good as in California, for example. And that's something to keep in mind. That means it needs to take some time to get FSD really deployed, like globally, of course. And also in Germany, it's very different. And then when you go over the border, Switzerland is different again. The roads are different. Also the markings are different. For example, on my way home, I have a bicycle lane, and they are separated just by a stone curb. For me, an indicator, yeah, that's the road, but not a white line. And that's a problem for the car. Then he thinks, oh, the bike lane. And I'm like, And also these small islands we have also where there are some crossings. Sometimes it's very narrow and the car would just get some rash on the wheels if I wouldn't take over, for example. But that's just my drive to work every day. I think I'm going to make a small video about that someday. But but these kind of things, we need data. It needs to be developing. But how do you think these things will develop? How can they tackle that?
Yeah, from my perspective, if it was a problem, if it was where they had to program the vehicle to deal with all these different things, it would take them forever to do it.
Yeah.
Right. And that was the
pretty
approach
complex.
that they were kind of taking initially. But now with advancements in AI, the idea is to let the car learn and train itself without telling it what a stop sign is, without telling it that that is a bicycle lane and that's a curb that you can't drive over. With enough data and enough, learning, the car can determine for itself that it shouldn't be there. If that works, if that is the case, if that's the way that the car can learn, then we will see an acceleration in the vehicle's abilities to navigate all these strange situations. And suddenly what seems impossible right now becomes very possible very quickly. And that's kind of the great hope. Exponentially. Yeah. And so layer on top of that, you've got an ever increasing number of sales of Tesla vehicles. And so you've got that data flywheel just growing exponentially as well. Right. And so I think we're hopeful now that the advancements in AI are going to get us to the point where this problem now can truly be solved in the not so distant future. Yeah. I can't make a prediction about when that's going to be. Elon often says it's going to be by the end of the year. He's been wrong so far, but eventually it will be by the end of some year. And it may surprise us now how soon that could be. Then we have the problem potentially of regulators catching up. But if the data truly supports it, if the data truly supports it and shows that it is that much safer, then regulators cannot ignore that, right? And people will also want to be in those vehicles, because if that's the safest way to travel, then you will want to be in a robotaxi. Some of these hurdles aren't insurmountable. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I find so interesting, like you've mentioned, there's this irrational, when I also talk with people who don't own a Tesla actually, and they see that I always do I just have lane keeping. It's just normal lane keeping, like the autopilot lane keeping standard thing. I didn't purchase the FSD pack because, of course, I will wait a little bit until I see a movement with regulators here, and then I'm going to jump over it. But right now, when I talk to people, they're like, oh, I can't imagine letting my car drive. But I think this is the same rationale they use when you compare it with airplanes. You always think airplanes are less safe than a car ride, but actually it's the opposite. Airplane ride is way safer than a car ride, actually. And I mean, for you, it doesn't make sense because the feeling of sitting in a plane, it goes off ground. It's so unusual to travel by plane in comparison that people are irrational about this topic, for example. And the same applies to those AI-driven cars.
Well, the other thing about airplanes, too, is they mostly fly themselves.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
that's also, that's the other.
If we're comfortable doing that, then having a car drive us around, we'll get used to that very quickly as well. It'll feel very normal very quickly. Right now, it may feel a little strange. And I have FSD in my car. So it's been an interesting experience, and it's amazing how comfortable you get with it. So, for example, just tell you a quick story. My mom, who lives in Canada, came to see us. And I picked her up at the airport and we took FSD home. And initially, she might have been a little apprehensive. The next night, we're coming home from dinner. And, we might have had a little bit to drink, but we weren't over the limit or anything. But she asked me if I could have the car drive itself home. So in one day, in 24 hours, she decided that the car was a better driver than me.
Yeah.
And again, I wasn't over the limit or anywhere near close, but she already felt very comfortable with the car's ability to make our drive home just that little bit safer. Now, the interesting thing is, and a lot of people have noticed this, is that when my car gets close to home, when it gets into my community, it often tries to really scare me. So it's great on the major roads. It's great on city
Hmm.
streets. But when I get to my neighborhood, for some reason, it doesn't quite know what to do, and so it's a little jerky, and it goes a little
Hmm.
too fast around the corners and that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
for the most part, it's an amazing piece of software.
Yeah, and what I've also noticed, I also talked about that with Scott Walter, is that you arrive at your destination a little bit more refreshed, if that makes sense, in
Hmm.
comparison to not having a feature, at least lane assist or lane keeping, at least. For me, also for example, on the autobahn or on the highway, I really feel like, okay, I'm gonna engage, and just of course lane changing, I still have to disengage for 1 sec,
Hmm.
then put it in. I'm so sure that the Tesla will brake and will accelerate at the right moment, because this is
Hmm.
pretty good.
Hmm.
And on a highway, it's such a difference, because I don't have to. Of course, I watch the road, but if you don't do that, of course it will disengage, and then you get penalties. And if you have 5 penalties, then you can't even engage it anymore, and you're like in the prison, if you could say so.
Yeah.
But I really notice it when I arrive at the destination, that I'm more refreshed, and this is so interesting. That's why also the model you've been through, there is so much value in this, also from the side of the user. Me as a customer of this system, of these systems. If Tesla deploys it, or if a fleet operator deploys it, is so valuable for me, because the cost of a mile driven will be substantially lower for me as a customer. So that's a win-win-win situation for everybody involved: the fleet operator, Tesla, and also the end customer in that sense. And of course, this will pressure. I mean, this is revolutionary. People, I think, can't sometimes wrap their head around it, because it's so complicated, of course. Yeah, it makes sense to look into this, because it has such a huge upside, despite the huge revenue potential that we can see here.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Just let me say too that these numbers are kind of not sort of the terminal numbers in terms of, once the network is at 100 million vehicles, here's the
Of
final
course.
price. I think there's actually a lot of room in here for the pricing to come down and for
Hmm.
people to benefit from even lower cost transportation than what
Hmm.
I've modeled out here. So in that case, the profit potential per vehicle would probably be less, but you make it up in the numbers at scale. Tesla would still make billions, trillions of dollars in profit. So that's something to consider. I'm kind of looking at a model, a few years out.
Hmm.
The network is getting underway. People are fleet operators are being established where it's in multiple cities around the world. This is how it might look at that point.
Hmm.
And then over time, they would be able to drive that cost per mile down.
And also, who says that Tesla will keep all the revenue? Will they, I don't know, maybe reduce the revenue, give it back to the customer in that sense? Because Tesla, for example, lowest prices all the time for the vehicles. Why are they doing that? Of course, it's about market share. They want to compete with the Chinese manufacturers as well. If they would keep their margins, it wouldn't make sense in the long run. In the short term,
Mhm.
of course, for the investor, it would be way better. People also were pretty furious. I also had, of course, Russ Gerber on my channel here last time, or a few weeks ago. And of course, he was fuming almost, because of this, that they lower prices and everything. I mean, for example, now we see the consequences of the leasing companies, of course. That's a
Mhm.
problem, because then this is a problem. But you can see that Tesla has this track record of just reducing prices, reducing costs, and people have more access to their cars. Now we will see if the strategy really was a good strategy of Elon to push for lowering price. But I also think that, now coming to my point, sorry for the long-winded answer, but in the FSD space, it could also be like, if you print money like crazy, you can just secure your market, maybe pressure competitors by lowering prices, because you have
Mhm.
such a huge upside. I mean, then
Mhm.
the market dominance is almost unfathomable. Yeah.
The other thing to think about too is, there's no doubt that Tesla will drive down the cost of making a vehicle. But if you can buy a vehicle for, let's say, $30,000, and that vehicle can make $10,000 for you per year, then what's that vehicle worth? Is it only worth 30,000? Actually, I don't think so. I think it's worth more than that.
Hmm.
So that's interesting to see how they're going to navigate that. Like as a Tesla buyer, you get a pretty good deal for buying a vehicle,
Yeah.
right? if eventually you can put it into a robotaxi network and make a bunch of money off of it at your option. You're in control if you want to do that or not. Now, of course, you are wearing out the vehicle faster than it otherwise would be. But to your point, if it's just sitting there anyway at your work parking lot while you're working 8 hours a day, why not make money off of it? Defray the price that you have, and you might end up buying a vehicle every 3 years. But that's fine because you've made lots of money on the vehicle that you bought 3 years before, right? Like it just changes the nature of that. And I think a lot of people too would decide that they wouldn't even need to buy a vehicle, save the 30,000, let a fleet operator buy those vehicles and operate them, and I'll just use transportation as a service. And I can do something else with that $30,000.
Yeah.
Go buy a robot with it or something.
And that's the next model, of course, to look into. We're going to link, of course, the video also here. I also wanted to add here that it's so interesting when you utilize your own vehicle, it kind of forces you to become a fleet operator, more or less, because if it's profitable and it's kind of a side hustle because I'm at work, of course, you have to build out the infrastructure for cleaning and everything, but that's a possibility. You could do that kind of not actively. You can let your car drive there, it's gonna be cleaned there and stuff like this, or you're an operator of a autonomous washing service or something like this. You're specialized in these kinds of vehicles. A lot of possibilities here. I don't know if your car kind of makes so much money that you can buy another car. Your car is more worn out than. Is it your personal car anymore? Then you can buy another car, maybe have two cars. Then you can choose what you want to utilize on that day. And maybe you want to have a Cybertruck. Then you have also a Cybertruck there in your fleet, or a Model S Plaid. And suddenly you have 5 Teslas sitting around earning money for you. And then, and then you can quit your day job, actually.
I think that's just it.
Operator,
I think that's just it, because a lot of people agonize over what vehicle they should get. Do I get a car? Do I get a van? Do I get a truck? Do I get this and that? And they got to figure out for their life what the optimal vehicle is. In a world where transportation is a service, you don't have to worry about that. If you need a van that day, you get a van. If the next day you need a truck, you get a truck. If you want a sports car over the weekend, you get a sports car. It changes the nature of the way people look at this. And not to mention that the cost saving opportunities. I'm a firm believer that economics drive all decisions ultimately. Now, people don't always spend in their economic interest, but at large, in the whole population, that's the case. And so if Tesla and a robotaxi network can drive down the cost of transportation, then we will see a massive shift toward, consumer behavior will move that direction. It'll free up capital. And a lot of people have speculated that, like in the United States, we have all these garages where people park their cars. Well, if you don't have a car, then you don't need a garage. Right. And so now you can repurpose that space in your house for another room. It could be an entertainment room or whatever you want it to be, another bedroom. There's a whole sort of offshoot of economic growth that could happen from renovating garages that no longer need to be used as such.
Or rent them out or something like this.
Rent them out. Yeah. Or a lot of people already use their garages as storage units. So in that case, they would just continue to use it as that. But there's an opportunity there to repurpose a lot of different assets, not just the vehicle, but other spaces. Parking lots. Would we need as many parking lots anymore? Could that be real estate that now is freed up to build something else that people need? So those kinds of second and third order changes are also very exciting from an autonomous world, because the cars would be moving around a lot more and being utilized. They wouldn't just be sitting in one place for 8 hours a day. That's really exciting.
It's going to free up the cities and everything. Yeah, it's interesting to look at that. Absolutely, yeah. So Cern, absolutely mind-blowing stuff again. I think. I mean, of course, it's always a little bit dry. Of course, we have to go through the slides and everything and make sense. The discussion for me, of course, is the most interesting thing, because then we can just run wild. But I think it's so necessary. You have to start somewhere, like I said before. That's why it's important to fix those variables and to do a freeze frame of what's happening, and then just look at this scenario. And like I said, in AI would be very interesting to see and model this through. Throw around the numbers and find the sweet spot in the calculation. This is also on the horizon, that we have something like this. I mean, for example, ChatGPT is improving pretty steep. You can see what they're going to do also with the language model, language input they're going to improve. And it's so crazy to see Pandora's box is already opened up, and now you can see all the ghosts flying out already, the new technologies here. Yeah.
That's right. And I think we see some of that sophistication already with Uber in the way they price. But this is at another level, because each vehicle knows where every other vehicle is going and where it's going to be. And so it can predict, if I need the robotaxi in half an hour, it's going to make sure that there's another vehicle very close. The level of optimization that can be achieved with AI and algorithm that's driven by AI could be very impressive. And I think people might have this magical experience where they feel like the car just came out of nowhere and it's ready for them. It almost predict what their needs are.
Yeah,
right.
It's true.
And that would be amazing. Instead of having to wait for a vehicle, it just sort of knew that I needed it or something, right? Like the level of sophistication, I think, could be pretty impressive. Not initially.
Absolutely.
Initially, we're going to get probably some crazy stories of people waiting, an hour for the robotaxi. But over time, these things get better and better.
Absolutely. And I can really see when you consider all those variables and all the scenarios and the developments we have, I get the point why AI is so dangerous now, in that sense that we kind of can't understand it anymore, because it becomes more and more complex. And if the networks of all the systems we have talk to each other and find their own path and program themselves, then suddenly it's like, I don't know why, but now the car is arriving here and I wanted to go there, something like this. Because, of course, you can gather data from the mobile phone. It's already scary what marketing already does with your data, that it can push you the advertisement at the right time, at the right second, when you need, for example, hiking boots, or you talk to someone and suddenly, where does this ad come from? I just talked to a friend about this. Does my phone listen? Yeah, no, it's just which Wi-Fi you're connected. What is this person interested in? You talk to this person and stuff like this. I mean, it's super complex. I get why this can be also very scary for some people too, because then we are like, okay, how does this even work anymore? Because we can't stop it. What's happening? But it works. Yeah.
There could be some really, really fun and surprising things. Like, for example, you're headed home, or in my case, if I'm headed home, and the car says to me, "Cern, are you sure you want to go home right now?" And I say, "Yeah, I'm leaving work and I'm going home." And the car says, "No, your wife really wants you to go to the grocery store."
Okay.
Right. The car's having this conversation with you. It's like, "Are you sure you want to go home, or you really got things to do, right?"
Yeah, or realizes a pattern that you go home and drive off again if there's a pattern over the year and you don't even realize it yourself, something like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the car says, "Did you forget? It's your wife's birthday tomorrow. Maybe you should go and stop and get a present or something, right?" So there could be some very interesting interactions that take place.
And also with the profiles, of course, because people have their profile on the phone. I mean, we already have. I mean, it's so interesting. The cars are almost like designed for this kind of future, because I can walk up to my car. I can send a friend a link to open up my car from over the internet, anywhere. It's just an email link. This is so crazy. And of course, this also means you have your profile here and you walk up to the car. It knows something about you already. And then you sit in the car and then you have your unique user experience just by giving the data to the car or having your phone around. I mean, this alone is, you just walk up to a taxi, sit in it, and then it makes suggestion where to drive because it knows you already. So this is also so great. Oh, even with the seating position where you sit, it could be, I mean, this already works. This is today. This works in the car right now. And this could be utilized for the FSD system as well. I mean, absolutely bonkers.
Yeah. Well, so think of an application where perhaps, you have a heart attack in the car. Car takes you straight to the hospital. It's able to sense that, or knows, or, you're wearing an Apple Watch or something and it senses it, or your device. There's all kinds of sort of applications that can be layered on top of this, because this is a platform that allows you to do all kinds of things. So we can't scarcely imagine today what the possibility is, but we can look at the development of the iPhone or the smartphone and all the apps now that we have for those devices that made that phone so much more useful as a computing device than it did as a phone. The same thing will likely happen with autonomous vehicles. It becomes a platform with which now you can layer services on top of. The one service that's obvious is delivering people, transporting people. Another service that's obvious is transporting, goods. That there's other services that we probably just can't even imagine today that we'll see. We can't sit here today and imagine any of that.
Yeah.
Right. Just like when the iPhone came out, we probably couldn't have imagined Uber.
Yeah.
Right. Somebody did and created the company.
Yeah.
Right. And all these other apps and services that we're now a part of our everyday lives. But the same thing will happen with autonomous vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
People will come up with other ways of using that platform and layering services on top of that and building massive businesses around that.
Absolutely. And what I wanted to say is just for everybody in the comments, please, everybody watching, please write something down below what you think, what your scenarios are, because I think it's such an interesting topic to and you can really let loose. What are your scenarios you're thinking about? I'm highly interested in this, and I love the discussions always. Of course, Cern will also come to the comments and read them and look into those, of course, and also because he wants to learn what's happening with this model. Can it be improved? Write something there. We can source this, crowdsource this a little bit. I think
please do. That would be very helpful.
What he is already doing. So or check out Cern, of course, on X. There you can engage with him the best, I think. Write your suggestions, whether they are hateful or not. Please be civil, of course, but just write your opinion in the comments there as well. So Cern, very much thank you for being here again.
My pleasure, Jan. It was a great discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. I couldn't help myself but discuss a little bit longer. We stretched the episode a bit, but I think it was totally great to do that.
It's been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much for being on. And of course, there's only one last thing to say here, and that's goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Wasn't this episode awesome? Let's accelerate the pace of innovation by subscribing to Tesla Fix. It is my absolute favorite channel on the whole interwebs.